Welcome to the AI and Faith podcast. We are a community of expert technologists, professionals, and faith leaders bringing the ancient wisdom of the world's major religions to the ethics of artificial intelligence. Join us on this new journey and welcome to the conversation.
I hope AI will help us reevaluate, especially as it becomes more pervasive and takes over more kinds of work. It helps us evaluate what brings meaning to the work that we do. Is it purely the nature of the work itself, or is it the connections that we're able to bring to the work? And so I would probably lean more towards that premise that if AI can help us expand our imagination to connect the seen and the unseen together, it is serving us well, because sometimes the most mundane tasks are not only the most meaningful, but also the most healing in our days. Taking a simple walk, creating a cup of tea or coffee may be some of the most healing things we do in the day, given all the hecticness and the fast pace of our schedules. And so if AI can slow us down and reconnect us to our humanity, I think it's doing something very much needed in our world today.
My name is Pablo Salmones, and I will be your podcast host. Today's episode is from an event in May 2024. Join us in our conversation with Dr. David Kim, founder of Goldenwood, as we delve into the challenges we face in cultivating a new vision of work in the era of AI, how religion can help in fostering this culture, and how to develop a positive vision of the future. David Kim is the CEO and co-founder of Goldenwood. Over the past several decades, Reverend Dr. David Kim has trained, consulted, and counseled hundreds of leaders and organizations in developing a robust, meaningful integration of faith and work. David's past experience as VP of Faith and Work, Executive Director of the Center for Faith and Work, Director of the Gotham Fellowship, and editor of the NIV Faith and Work Bible have given him a breadth of exposure to the challenges of integrating faith and work. His expertise as key thought leader in the faith and work space has been well established, having addressed prominent institutions and churches around the world. David's passion is to help people and organizations see the unseen realities that give rise to the world we create. Thank you so much, David, first of all, for being here to share your knowledge with us, to share your knowledge with the community.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you all, and I've been such an appreciative of this organization, so needed in our day. So thank you for the invitation to be here with you all.
Meaningful integration of faith and work. Why is that important to you? Like, how have you personally incorporated your faith into your work, and why have you decided to dedicate a portion of your life to integrating faith and work?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. Actually, that's quite a big question. But for me, I think it comes down to how I define work. I see work in very much as the integration of unseen and seen elements. When you think about historically, the meaning of work, there was this sense that what we're doing is more than just material. There's something invisible that we're bringing out into the world. And for me, the deepest connection to the invisible would be the conception of love itself. How do we love one another well through the things that we do? And so one of our kind of mission in our organization is to revive work with love, which might feel a little bit strange for some people, because you don't often hear work and love in the same sentence. But my conviction is that we're all actually created to love well and love meaningfully and appropriately, given the different contexts. And work, I think, is one of those primary avenues through which we can demonstrate love, because that's what most people do most of their waking hours, whether it's paid or unpaid, whether it's raising kids or serving coffee. I think when we all experience work as this connection between invisible and visible, whether it's hospitality that you're making known through the coffee that you're serving and the care that you put into grinding the beans and making the temperature the right temperature. All that is a reflection, I think, of something that it makes life a lot more meaningful and rich. So that for me has been the driving impetus of trying to help people understand that work can be the arena through which not only do we find our meaning, but we bring that meaning and love into the world around us.
It was said that AI would bring mundane jobs that, it would make them obsolete so that we could dedicate our lives to other things like art and philosophy and all these different things. And quite the opposite appears to have happened, right? I mean, I just got a haircut and the haircut was made by a human being. It wasn't made by a robot or something. While AI, however, is capable of writing essays and all these sort of things. But it's interesting because I have two questions related to this. The first one is, do you think this is indeed happening? That is, that AI is doing jobs that we were promised actually that we were going to be the ones doing that job so that AI could do some other less intellectually demanding in some cases jobs. And the other question is, I think it's far more important. I personally don't believe that jobs itself, like the activity itself of giving a haircut or the activity of writing an essay or the activity of even creating some sort of book or whatever, that the activity itself, the meaning that you can attach to that activity, but rather the way in which one performs the activity, the way in which you work. Do you think that we can, in this era of AI, when AI is taking over all these different things, that we can make each of our activities meaningful rather than looking for activities that perhaps in themselves will be more meaningful? What do you think about that?
It's a great question because I do think we seem to have a hierarchy of work in our
Mhm.
society. Certain work is deemed as superior than others. But I think for every human being that comes into the world, the most mundane tasks of feeding, preparing meals. I mean, in some ways, that is some of the most meaningful things that we do for one another, especially for those we care for. And so, in a lot of ways, I think I hope AI will help us reevaluate, especially as it becomes more pervasive and takes over more kinds of work. It helps us evaluate what brings meaning to the work that we do. Is it purely the nature of the work itself, or is it the connections that we're able to bring to the work? And so I would probably lean more towards that premise that if AI can help us expand our imagination to connect the seen and the unseen together, it is serving us well because sometimes the most mundane tasks are not only the most meaningful, but also the most healing in our days. Taking a simple walk, creating a cup of tea or coffee, may be some of the most healing things we do in the day, given all the hecticness and the fast pace of our schedules. And so, if AI can slow us down and reconnect us to our humanity, I think it's doing something very much needed in our world today.
You mentioned at the beginning, reviving work with love, which is precisely one of the mission that you have at the Goldenwood. So perhaps you can tell us a bit more about that work that you do at Goldenwood, connecting the seen and the unseen, as you were saying, and how can we cultivate a vision of hope at work?
Well, yeah, this is kind of what I spend most of my days thinking about and focusing on. So I'll try to keep this fairly short. But I think one of the most influential books I read was by this Canadian philosopher, Charles Taylor. He wrote his tome, the book, The Secular Age. And in this book, he used this term, the malaisis of modernity, where he was describing just the feelings of flatness, the loss of meaning, and ethical relativism that he saw this kind of rampant in our society. And this was probably written now almost 20 years ago. And I think that's only accelerated since his writing of that important text. And what he was tracing in that book is implied in the title, this idea that people had moved from what he was calling from porous selves to buffered selves. And in those terms, he was trying to describe the movement in our society that we went from a society that was open to the supernatural, the mystical, the mysterious, the invisible, into a kind of positivized world where just empiricism was the prevailing philosophy. And we entered into this buffered self where we were no longer able to engage in kind of things like the supernatural or things that were not accounted for through just the empirical. And another kind of set of phrases that he would use is our world entered into what he called a disenchanted frame, meaning the world had lost its enchantment of the supernatural. And I think that there is in our work, there's kind of the re-enchantment of our world. And I ran a conference probably now 8 years ago called about how do we in technology and re-enchanting our world and in a way that help people connect the things that often bring meaning into our lives through the very material things that often seem to be taking that away from us. And so a lot of the work that we do in Golden was how do we begin to slow people down to become more aware of those invisible realities that are around us. And part of in my particular theology, a theology of sin, which is not a proper a popular kind of concept. And certainly there have been a lot of abuses of that, even that concept. But what has been helpful for me is this idea that sin has made us blind to the invisible realities of our world. I think can we begin to reconnect for people? A lot of this is simply slowing down the pace of our lives. How do we begin to connect the meaning that is embedded in our world with the tasks that we perform each day so that in that meaning, that connection with meaning, we begin to see the humanity of the people with whom we're working with and working for, or serving as managers or as CEOs. How do we begin to connect all those things together through rituals, through rhythms that slow us down, again, to make that connection between the seen and the unseen?
And you mentioned something which I think is very interesting, which of slowing people down, which I would imagine is quite a challenge to slow people down in an area in which everything seems to go faster and faster, in an area in which technology seems to go faster and faster. So, how do you normally engage that challenge of trying to slow people down in an era in which everything seems to just move at a faster pace every day?
Yeah, I just came back 2 days ago from a week in Cambridge, UK, where we just had a small call of people to what we would call enter a fallow retreat. And that term fallow comes from the Old Testament, where God commanded the Israelites to let the land lay fallow and replenish, to rejuvenate. And the idea is for, as human beings, when we bring that concept of fallowing, of just allowing ourselves to do unproductive work. That there's a lot of a tremendous amount of healing that our bodies are able to do when the contexts allow us to engage in that kind of healing. And so, we were expecting 16, maybe max 20 people to come, and we had 20 people from around the world. I'm sorry, 42 people come from around the world with no marketing. And this was all word of mouth. And we started to see we were getting people from as far east as kind of Seoul, Korea, as well as in Europe and mostly from the US. But it was this really strange phenomenon where we saw just how desperate people were to slow down. And this idea of fallow, which I guess again is not that common, but I think in the description of that, there was something that resonated with people. That the way I describe that fallow work is the stuff that you would normally feel really guilty doing, that you were able to engage in that. Bring your books, bring all the things, and just being in the wonder and beauty of that institution, Cambridge, also evokes this, the imagination in quite spectacular ways. And so we try to help people have structure. And for me, I try to let space, place, and people do the heavy lifting of fallowing instead of being very instructive or giving no structure. You allow, location and the beauty of space, especially spaces that have gardens and nature, that ends up doing some of the heavy lifting of how you spend your days, and just really intriguing and diverse people from around the world. Just, I think that does some really amazing things to our brains, to our bodies, through our ability to perceive and become more aware. And the comments we were getting from people, which was a very common, response, was, I haven't felt this human in a long time, and that for me was the big win for people, just to feel human. And the other comment we would often hear is, wow, the day seems so long, in a good sense. Like when you're working and you're in the clock, days go by so quickly without you realizing what just happened. And I think we saw kind of the inverse of that, where these days just felt like they were full and rich and meaningful. So that's one way. That's a very particular way we try to slow down, where there's a lot of different ways that we try to do that. But just to incorporate a little bit of the AI theme, we often say, how does AI actually help us to slow down? I know a lot of people associate AI with the speeding up of our lives and the efficiencies that it can bring. But I also help people to think about how AI creates more time and space so that they can slow down, so that they can engage in more human interactions. And I often refer to this one Japanese theologian. He wrote this book called The 3 Mile Per Hour God. And in that, he was referring to the pace in which humans walk. And there's this passage in Genesis that talks about God walking with Adam and Eve in the cool of the garden. And that notion for us to kind of engage that deeper part of who we are, that invisible part of who we are, we have to walk at that pace of 3 miles per hour in a world that is used to going 60 plus miles per hour. So I'll stop there. I mean, a lot more could be said about helping people slow down, but I'll stop there.
Now you're saying I haven't felt this human for a long time ago. That was people were telling you. That's such a deep statement. And at the same time, you're saying, for example, AI creates more time, more time and space. And I think, yes, that is true. And at the same time, however, we need to make sure of how we use that extra time and space opportunities perhaps that we're given by AI. And in that sense, there's something in Goldenwood's website which I really loved, which is you say every work of renewal begins with a dream. In that sense, and relating that to AI, what would be that dream in the era of AI? That I know that dreams are, very personal, but what's the dream in the era of AI? And do you think, in your experience, can people's dreams change, not willingly or unwillingly, depending on the different things that are surrounding them and the specific moment in time in which we're living?
One of the things I started with is I think the difference between an enchanted and a disenchanted frame, meaning how you see this world, I think has a lot to how you would respond to your question. For me, dreams are the opportunity for the invisible to really connect with the visible. I mean, if you think about it in a dream, you're imagining a whole world, and yet you're having it in your sleep, in your physical state of sleep. And for me, that also the notion of dreams from a Christian standpoint has special theological significance because this is often the place in which God intersects with people, that there is a sense that God intersects through dream. And when we think about this concept of how we renew the world, how do we begin to create new things into the world? I think everyone can agree that it always begins in an idea or a dream. And dreams and ideas that are connected to, I think, an imaginary when I use the word imaginary, I mean things that flow out of the greatest conception of what our world can be. And those people who have an enchanted frame in some ways can have the luxury of being more imaginative because again, if I lean from my Christian theology, there's a belief that the world will ultimately end in this place of what the Bible calls New Jerusalem, a place where there is no more curse, where there's no more sin that divides people, there is no brokenness. And when that is the end of the story, that begins to create a different social imagination in my mind. It leads me towards hope and it leads me to dream things despite, I think, often the realities that we find ourselves in, especially ones that feel very despairing. And so I think, again, that enchanted frame becomes so important in shaping even the nature of dreams. Are dreams hopeful or are they more leaning towards nightmares? I think a lot of times when I look at the literature around AI and the people leading the industries, I find that they are often operating out of a disenchanted frame. In some ways, they can only take the best of what they empirically have seen in our world. And sadly, there are so many bad examples of how people have used technology not for human flourishing, but also for human destruction. And so often I see that negative social imagination, impinging upon possible dreams. And so one example is a long time ago, I think this was in the 70s, the War Games movie. Do you want to play a game? And AI basically puts the world in the brink of thermonuclear war. And I think about that from like an enchanted frame, of a hopeful frame. I can imagine, our world entering into this place where someone is putting their finger on one of the buttons to bring about a nuclear kind of attack. And imagine, can AI at that point intervene and actually say, do you really want to do that? You might want to think again about that. Maybe the AI gives all these reasons why. I guess I can imagine in my dreams a version of AI that is the better version of our humanity, the best version, where one that is filled with the ethics of loving one another and what it means to treat one another as you would want to be treated yourself. And so when I think of dreams for particular to AI and what I try to cultivate in the groups I talk to, is really that imagination. And when people hear that, they honestly say, I never thought of AI in that way. I never thought that AI could be used actually inspire people towards really the best versions of ourselves. All that to say that would be kind of the dream that I would have for AI. When people engage in AI, they find themselves surprisingly encouraged and filled with hope and filled with possibilities on the kind of people that we can be and the kind of society that we can build together.
And I certainly share that dream with you. What are the main challenges that we have ahead of us to try to make that happen? Throughout human history, it's been hard enough to agree on things, for human beings. But particularly when it comes to an ethical framework, it's always been hard. In fact, not long ago, we had as a guest Bishop Paul Tai from the Vatican, who spoke also a bit about precisely these challenges of agreeing to a set of values to embed into the ethics of AI. So now that we have this dream, what are the next steps and what are the challenges that we might face when trying to, well, make this dream come true in this era of AI?
I don't know if I'm qualified to talk about the technical ways of doing that, but I often think of this passage by the theologian Paul in the New Testament where he writes, "Do not be overwhelmed with evil, but overwhelm evil with good." You know, we don't want to be naive as to the possibilities of the negative uses of AI. It won't take us very long to go there. But with that sobriety, can we overwhelm the evil with good? Meaning, can we consider all the use cases in which AI is now leading to the flourishing of the world? And similar to the internet, when the internet first came out, people didn't know what to do with it. People began to use their imagination and cultivate all the dot coms that we have now that, you know, most of people, I think today generally have a positive association with the internet because we've seen the way, you know, from the gig economy to all the ways it's simplified and made our lives a lot easier. I think if there are ways that we can begin to help people understand how this is in some ways like the internet, but also markedly different from the internet, you know, how do we begin to create the positive imagination? What are all the positive ways we can use AI? And really, hopefully, AI will begin to pick up on that in a matter of speaking, and we won't have to program it in a way that forces its hand because that, again, I don't know the technicalities involved with the challenges of something like that, but I imagine, you know, as we begin to employ this technology in the years and decades to come, that my very simple vision is how do we overwhelm this technology with good and begin to hopefully see, you know, we reap what we sow. And it is a mirror to, I believe in a lot of ways, technology is a mirror to our own souls. How does it reflect, again, the better nature of our angels?
That's wonderful, David, and I love this quote of "overwhelm evil with good." I think that's certainly a great way to put it. Following this line of thought that you were saying, how can organizations like AI and Faith and organizations like Goldenwood help with this, both from a perspective of like experts, for example, that we have, like the community that we have here, and also with everyday people, the people that perhaps don't have as much knowledge regarding AI and regarding faith itself, any of these different topics, because they're sometimes are very complex topics. So how can we make sure that this message comes across and that this message also impacts more and more people? Like, what do you think organizations can do to make that happen?
I find when I address, especially a lot of faith communities, and I typically address more the Christian faith, you know, there's an initial skepticism, you know, the whole like arms crossed, and you know, they're quite, you know, they had this prejudice of that's going to take over our world, and some, you know, in ways that have been more informed by Hollywood than really thinking, I think, long and deep about this technology. But what I've found with that initial kind of skepticism is a very easy kind of, you can break through that really quickly by just a few examples and letting them see how this technology can be used. And one of the technologies, one example I give, we created this prayer bot. We call it's the Goldenwood prayer bot. And the whole idea is how does a bot help you slow down and just whatever work situation you're in, you're going to have a stressful conversation with a boss or with an employee, or you're going in for your performance review, or I'm just bored out of my mind sitting here, and you know, engage with the bot and see what comes out of it. I think when people begin to see, wow, I never thought I can engage a bot in a way that's actually pretty meaningful to where I am right now. I think the ability to evangelize AI to people has been quite easy, meaning people convert quite quickly when they begin to see the potential good because until they use it, you know, their imagination tends to be quite negative. But as soon as they see the positive use cases, you know, they're willing to engage it and they figure out how to use it. And I say, treat this not like an internet search, treat it like a person that you're talking to from a different country that doesn't know, you know, who you are, doesn't know your culture. But the more you explain, the easier it is for them to understand how to respond to you in really meaningful ways.
And you know, you just mentioned something which I think is part of a great debate, which is how to treat technology. You mentioned treat this like a human being, which is a debate others guests that we've discussed about that. You know, about what's the relationship that we should have with this technology. I know you mentioned kind of like giving more time, creating more time and space. But you know, sometimes in the office, when you have more time, they say, "Ah, you have more time. There are more activities for you to do." What other tools do you think AI will, or that we can come up with, so that AI can offer a more meaningful work aside from extra time and extra space that we may have on an everyday basis?
The beauty and the power of AI, I think right now in its current form, There's this strange humanity, and I think this is largely responsible for just how quickly it's been adopted. There's a surprising amount of humanity in the responses AI gives, and I particularly gravitate more toward Claude right now. But and the feature, the chat feature that it remember, I think things like giving you journaling prompts. If you have 5 minutes, I often will say, help, and I've kind of given a lot of information about myself to this bot, create my kind of my version of the bot, and it helps me. Again, I anonymize it, so I'm not putting a lot of personal identifiable information on there. But what it helps me to do is to slow down. It helps me become more reflective. I'm a big fan of long writing with my fountain pen and a notebook. Oftentimes, when it knows kind of the things that I've done, my values, it will give me some wonderful prompts. I have 5 minutes. So I'll say, I have 5 minutes. Please give me a prompt to help me reflect upon the day or the week. And I think, I just saw Microsoft announce the Copilot laptop that they're going to be selling. And that's going to make that all the more accurate. And I'm sure with, the new operating systems for Apple as well. I think using AI to really slow us down, to be reflective, to think about what does it mean to engage with this person at a human level and not just at a colleague or work level. I hope it will actually challenge kind of our ability to bring in that humanity into spaces that in our frenetic nature or in our the height of emotions that we often feel from the news cycles and the things that we're just going to remember, hey, we're all people, and I'm trying to help this person, and vice versa, get through the day so that they can be with family, they can be with others that they care about. So things like that, I imagine, I would hope, really AI to help us to slow down and help us discover new ways of just slowing down and rediscovering what it means to be a human being.
I think that's certainly one of the great challenges and one of the great opportunities as well that we have, and being able to see this future with the eyes of hope and meaningful work as well. It's, I think, one of the great opportunities that we have here. It's the same time an opportunity and a challenge. This has been very, very revealing, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you all.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Stay tuned to listen to more recordings and interviews with experts from around the world. In the meantime, follow and rate our podcast on your favorite podcast platform and share with your friends. Don't forget to follow us on our social media as well. We're on LinkedIn and X. Thank you for joining us today.